Hey guys, kinggath here, and in this video, we're going to walk through the Conqueror startup options for those of you who want to start the game out with your settlements pre-built with some Sim Settlements city plans in place already. So after you finish creating your character, within a few seconds, you're going to get some prompts from Sim Settlements. And the first one is just going to ask you to set up your graphic settings. Now, there's a couple of things to note here. First off, if you're on Xbox, you're going to see the version of Xbox you have as an option instead. And in general, you should just choose the correct answer. Now, if you're an experienced Sim Settlements player and you've used a lot of the city plans in the past and you know that your system struggles with them, you should lie to Sim Settlements. Pick the lowest setting here, and what that will do is make Sim Settlements place far fewer objects. They will cut out a lot of the details, and it should eliminate a lot of the issues you're having, or at least reduce the likelihood of you repeating those same issues you've had in the past. Again, if you've had issues in the past, after you get started past the startup sequence, you should go visit a bunch of the settlements you've struggled with and make sure you're not having issues before you commit too much time to your playthrough. The things can vary greatly from system to system and player to player because your mod load order can have a heavy impact on things, especially on Xbox where you have a strict memory limitation. So on the lower end Xbox, you're going to want to use lower settings and you're going to want to experiment a bit with this before you commit to your playthroughs. On PC, it can be all over the map. I have two gaming computers, one that's about 5 years old, one that's about 2 years old, and the one that's 5 years old runs far better with Sim Settlements and Conqueror than the one that's only 2 years old. So it seems to be a combination of issues with drivers and just certain hardware. Fallout 4 does not seem to always basically work the same way for every computer. I've had people show me these insane systems they have that just don't work great with a lot of city plans. So keep that in mind when you use this startup option, is you should experiment a little bit and see how much you can handle before you commit hard to a playthrough. So I've experimented heavily on this computer and I seem to be able to handle everything. So I'm going to go ahead and choose Ultra. And then shortly after you answer that question, you're going to get the real meat of the Conqueror startup. Now, the idea behind the Conqueror system is that essentially it's taking all of the work we did in Rise of the Commonwealth and allowing it to be pre-placed so that you can start up your games and have a new experience every time. And there's a couple of different ways you can take advantage of that, whether it just be that you want the cities to start up so that you can explore them instead of feeling like you're managing them, or to play into the meat of the Conqueror system, which is to actually take them over and capture them through our Raider questline. Now, at the recording of this video, many people are only going to be using Conqueror just for this startup system, so that's going to be the tutorial we cover now, and we'll continue to add additional tutorials as more of the features of Conqueror are opened up to people who don't necessarily want to play on the Raider side. So all of the features, or most of the features that are in the Raider playthrough, will eventually be opened up to be used by other factions, and that's when we anticipate that more players will want to make use of it, and then we will make tutorial videos following those. But for now, this is probably the only video you'll need to watch for Conqueror if you are not interested in Raider gameplay. And then all of the Raider gameplay itself actually will walk you through it through in-game tutorials, either through the quest line or through pop-up messages. So this is probably the only video we will need for Conqueror for the near future. If you want detailed information beyond this right now, there is a live stream Q&A I did on the launch day you can look at. It's still on the YouTube channel, and that has tons and tons of deep information. But of course, you've got to listen to me prattle on for several hours. So we will get more tutorials as needed here. All right, so now let's continue. Basically, what this system is going to allow you to do is choose how you want Conqueror to operate. So the goal of this particular menu system is to allow you to randomize things and change up your mind or have detailed control so that you kind of get to set yourself up almost like a scenario with each of your new playthroughs, similar to RTS style games where you get to pick up some options and make sure that each of your playthroughs is very unique. And one of the ways you can do that is by picking specific settlements or sets of city plans, which is especially relevant now that we have a lot of city plans coming out through the city plan contest, is you actually will see a lot of different options available. So we're going to start by looking at each of these menus of the overview, and then we'll go into each one in detail. So the first option here is okay, I'm ready. By default, Conqueror is set up to be set up the way most of you would probably want to use it, and it's a good way to experiment and see what your system can handle. So it will skip all of the settlements that maybe are risky to use at first due to quests and things like that where you don't want it to interfere with them. It will keep them at a low level, level 1 to start, and it will fill them up with people that you can go and talk to, so that most of the shops and stuff are actually filled with merchants. So if you just want to quickly get up and running, you can just quickly hit OK, I'm ready here, and go through and let it finish, do its thing. But I think most of you who have experience with Rise of the Commonwealth are probably going to want to dig into some of these other menus. But those of you who are just ready to get in there and get going, you can pretty much just hit OK, I'm ready, and then confirm on the next screen as well. But just for the sake of explaining everything, I'll keep going through the rest of this video. So if you're just looking to figure out what you got to do, it's literally just hit this, hit OK, I'm ready, and then yes, let's do this, and it will start going in the background. All right, so now let's go back and go over the rest of these options. So because this Conqueror pop-up is going to come up no matter what when you have Conqueror installed, and maybe you don't want to use this system, but you still want to play with Conqueror for some of its other features, for example, the Raider quest line or the new buildings that are added to Sim Settlements, you can actually just hit, actually, I changed my mind about this system, and then you'll get one more time to confirm to make sure you didn't accidentally click that, and you would just hit, I'm certain I don't want this option, and it will not run any city plans in advance. Now, I still want to go back, so I'm going to hit, oops, I didn't mean to do that, and we'll go back to here. The next screen, or the next option down, is Pick Settlements City Plans. This is where you'll have options to choose which settlements or which city plans will actually get pre-built. Then we've got level options. This will let you control what level the settlements are actually built at. Because they're based on city plans, each of these pre-built designs has 4 different levels that can potentially be built for you. Settler options let you control the types and number of settlers that will actually appear at the city plans as they're pre-built. And then randomization options are a little more fun, a little more complicated, but they're a way to make sure that you can have a unique playthrough each time where you don't pre-know exactly what's going on. So let's go back up and let's go to the Pick Settlements and City Plans. So when you go to this option, you will have 2 sub-menus here. And if you go to the first one, Pick Settlements, now whenever you get to a new screen that has a lot of information, I try to do one of these pop-ups to give you some more information in case you aren't watching a video like this. But essentially what this is telling you is that you are looking at a screen where everything on the left is the stuff that won't be pre-built. Everything on the right is the stuff that will be pre-built. Now, but depending on what city plans you have installed and what options you choose on the next screen I'm going to show you, that might not necessarily be true. But essentially, if you have a settlement on the right here and there is a city plan available for it, it will be built. Unless we get to some randomization options, but we'll talk about that when we get to it. So by default, these settlements here on the left are disabled for the system. So if you were to just had gone through and hit OK, I'm ready right away, these would not be built. That's because they generally involve some sort of quest before they're yours, for example, Covenant or the Mechanist Lair, where you wouldn't want to just build them right away without risking screwing up those quests. Same with the Castle and Vault 88. Sanctuary Hills, it can screw up Codsworth's quest, but the way to get around that is to, before you go talk to him, go kill all of the bloatflies inside of Sanctuary, and then his quest will be able to commence normally. So if you want to build the Sanctuary Hills city plan, at least the one from Rise of the Commonwealth, you can still do that without problems as long as you go kill the bloatflies before talking to Codsworth. Red Rocket we have on this list because we're concerned that future city plans that community authors release might cause a problem with dog meat. So this might be one where you want to skip just for that. But the Rise of the Commonwealth city plan for Red Rocket does work without interfering with dog meat. So if you do want to have Red Rocket pre-built, just make sure that you remove any city plans that you're uncertain of. I imagine most mod authors, now that they're aware of this particular system, will avoid doing things that might interfere with dog meat, such as like pushing him under the world or breaking his markers. So then on the right, if you want to remove a settlement, say we don't want a particular one to build, you essentially buy it from this particular screen. So we'd hit buy, it costs you 0 caps. And then you can basically sell back ones that you do want, and you just set it all up so the ones on the right are the ones you want to build. And then you click the accept button, confirm the trade, and then exit out. And now your settlement list is set, and you can go back again within this menu system. It does take a few moments for it to generate things because it's going to analyze all of your choices, and then it will do things like update the city plans that would be available. So when we go to the next menu, which is a similar screen, it's going to find all of the city plans that are eligible for the settlements that you used so that you're not having to pick through every single one. You'll just see those. So currently I have the City Plan Contest Entries mod installed, as well as Rise of the Commonwealth, so I've got a good selection available here. So just like the other screen, any of them that I don't want to appear, that I don't want to be used, I can just buy them back from the City Plan screen on the right, so they end up in my inventory. So if you want to absolutely choose the specific one for each settlement, you would just remove all of the others. Now, one of the things that we aim to fix in a future update to the City Plan Contest Entries patch is to make sure that each of the city plans from those have the name of the settlement in, so it's very clear. As of right now, there are a few, for example, the gray wards, where it's not strictly clear which one it's going to be for, and we're going to fix that in a future update to the contest entries mod. In fact, that might already be up by the time you see this video. But anyway, if you pare it down to where there's just one for each of the settlements, you'll know exactly which one's going to be built. But if you leave multiple, for example, if I leave everyone here, you can see there are several different options for Oberland. If I leave all of those in, it will randomly choose between them. So that's one of the ways you can get a little bit of randomization, where you won't know exactly what's going to be built, which can really help add to that feeling of exploration when you're not already in your head mentally knowing what you're going to run into when you come across these settlements. And that's one of the things that's a big, powerful piece of this part of Conqueror. So I'm going to just leave all of these in here. So since I didn't trade anything, I can just hit the exit, and this will again update the options and prepare Sim Settlements, or prepare Conqueror rather, to show you the correct options in the other menus. So all right, so we're done showing those. We're going to go back, and then we're going to go down to level options. So by default, it's starting them at level 1. This tends to be a safe level for most systems. So like I mentioned at the beginning of the video, for some of you who have had trouble, for those of you who haven't used the city plans yet, you should be very aware that the city plans can be very stressful on systems, and especially the lower end Xbox. So what you might want to do on a lower end system, or if you started at the default or the higher and you start to have issues, you might want to come in here and start your city levels at level 0, or if you've got them at level 1 and you had problems later, you could turn off the allow cities to upgrade. So you can actually start your cities at any level. So if there are, I know many of you have asked many times to be able to just see the final levels of the cities. Well, this is your opportunity to do so. You could start them all up at any particular level you want. We'll also talk about some other options you have with these later, but for now I'm going to leave this on starting at level 1. Allow cities to upgrade. This is a great one to turn off if you're just experimenting, or if you're concerned about your system not being able to handle it, because that way those city plans will stay as they are at the beginning of the game throughout it. But one of the fun things is, if you know your system can handle the higher level city plans, it's really cool to come back to a settlement you had visited earlier and find that it had upgraded, because the city plans can change dramatically from level to level, especially from level 0 to 1 and 1 to 2. And then at level 3, there tends to be some big sweeping things, something really cool, especially in the Rise of the Commonwealth. We really tried to add some really cool props or some new features at the level 3 of these. So it can be a lot of fun and add a lot of potential for wanting to revisit these settlements if you allow them to upgrade during your gameplay. Plots start at city level. Again, another option that's on by default. And this essentially means that if you decide to start your city levels at level 2 or level 3 and you have this option on, the plots that are built will also start at that level. Now, if you have this off, essentially plots will all start at level 1 and they will work their way up throughout gameplay. No matter what you have this setting on, the plots are independent of that. Now, these options may expand or change in the future. So if you've watched this video and you're seeing options that aren't here, I will generally try and make them self-explanatory, and we will keep the wiki up to date with these option menus as much as possible, since it's a lot quicker to update those on the wiki than it is in these videos. And then lastly, we have use designer's choice building plans. So designer's choice essentially means that when the person who designed the settlement initially, so the person who created the city plan and came up with how it should lay out, when they were doing so, they got to choose the plans that each plot would use. So the city has a plan, and then each of the plots have a building plan which decides what goes on that plot. So essentially, the city plan might store the locations of a bunch of agricultural plots. Well, then the city designer also got to choose which building was built on those agricultural plots. By default, this option is on, so you get to see exactly the design the city planner had intended, but it's more there on by default so that, sorry about my dog squeaking, I don't think we can edit that out in post, so that's just going to be part of the video. So anyway, the designer choice is on by default not only so you get to see their vision, but also because often certain building plans just only work in certain areas. There are some that are a little bit larger than the plot. There are some for the interior plots where they would be blocking doorways or other things. And so the designer's choice building plans being on is a good idea if you want to make sure that you don't have to micromanage the settlements. But if you want to make sure all of your add-on packs are being used and you want a good amount of variety and you don't care about little quirks like things blocking doorways, which isn't really a huge deal because the AI is kind of dumb anyway, you could turn this off and that would ensure that all of your add-on packs you have installed are being used across all of the different settlements. All right, next we've got settler options. So allow population growth. So essentially this in combination with the population level can add some more dynamic gameplay so that you can experiment and see new things as you're visiting these settlements throughout the playthrough. So allow population growth essentially means that as the settlement lives on, it can continue to recruit new settlers. Now this is especially important if you're going to allow the cities to upgrade. You're definitely going to want to leave this on. Otherwise, as the settlement upgrades between levels and it adds more beds in residential plots, there won't be anyone to live in them. But if you leave allow population growth on, additional people will continue to move in over time. Population level, this is how much it would start with. So if you set this down to a lower number, you could again experience the settlements growing over time. So say you wanted to set it to something like 50%. So you have all the options every 10% you can set. And it will basically it will look at the number of settlers that the city plan supports at the level that you started it at, and then it will fill it with that many people. All right, next up is use civilians. So in the vanilla game, you had the settlers, and unfortunately, a lot of their dialogue is very specific to the player controlling things. So there's a lot of dialogue that implies that you're going to be helping them or that you're going to be giving them something to do, things like that, and it can be kind of unimmersive. So civilians were our response to that. So civilians are essentially a pool of custom NPCs, and it's something we'll continue to expand on. They have custom voices. They have a bunch of very generic lines that are not asking you for help necessarily, but are more just talking about things we tried to do it in an immersive way so that the things they're talking about are all relevant to the game world, and they will just say random things to you if you walk up to them, but they're not the settler lines. We've got a much deeper pool of lines than the vanilla game settlers, and eventually we'll have a much deeper pool of faces and voice types. So I think right now we have about the same number of voices, but long term we will probably have far more than vanilla. So civilians are recommended just because there's a lot of immersion that goes into adding those in, and you don't have to worry about feeling like you're back in an original settlement you're in control of where you have to babysit your settlers. All right, now we get to the randomization option. So this is kind of an advanced feature. I don't anticipate everybody using it, especially their first time through, but it can add a lot of variety to things so that you're not seeing the same experience each time you go through and start a new playthrough with the Conqueror system. So the idea behind randomization, and this menu is definitely going to be expanded greatly in the future with more and more gameplay options to keep each of your playthroughs fresh, but you have the following options. So randomize settlements to build. So what this will do is, on that first screen where I showed you the settlements and city plans you could choose, if you choose the settlements that you want, and then you don't necessarily want all of them, but you want a subset of them. So say you pick a bunch of settlements you want to build, but you actually only want about 50% of them to build, but you don't want to have to predetermine which. You're just like, I don't care as long as some amount of them are built. You can turn this on. So as soon as you click randomize settlements to build on, you'll get two new options, the minimum percent to build and the maximum percent to build. So by default, it will go between 50 and 100%, but you can alter each of these. So you could say, so if you left it at 50 to 100%, the Sim Settlements Conqueror would decide a percentage of your settlements between those numbers. So it might choose 60%, it might choose 40 or 50%, it might choose 70%, something in between the number you choose at the minimum and maximum. It will choose that number of settlements and apply city plans to those, and the rest will remain empty. And that way, you won't be sure which ones are built each game, so you can get some variety. The same happens with randomized starting levels. So as soon as you turn this on, you'll get two new options, the minimum and maximum. So you could set up something like allowing some of them to start up fully built while as big giant cities for you to explore, while others will just be the foundation, which is just going to be a bare bones settlement with just a few people living in them. So you have, again, some variety, and so you don't know specifically what you're going to run into when you go to those settlements for the first time in your playthrough. And then lastly, you can do the same for populations. So again, you can choose the percentages, the min and max, and that relates to the thing I talked about with the population about how many people start at the settlements. So by setting this, you could again arrange so that some of your cities and foundation level settlements, some of them are populated heavily, whereas others are populated a little smaller. And again, this is all just to add variety so that each time you decide to roll up a new playthrough, you can make sure there's a good amount of difference to the game and that no two playthroughs will ever be the same when you're visiting settlements. So that is the end of the current options as of the 4.0.0 launch patch of Conqueror. Again, we'll continue to add to this and expand on it. But basically, once you've got the options in a state you're satisfied with, you'll hit OK, I'm ready. Then yes, let's do this. And then you just play through the opening sequence. And usually by the time you're out of the vault, you will see that most of the work is done. So the first settlements you go out and visit will be fully built. Now, there are a couple of things to know about this in the background, and these are very important things. So number one, if you're using an alternate start mod, most likely Conqueror will not be finished with any settlements by the time you activate your alternate start. So know that you might want to let Conqueror sit and run for a bit. So after you start up your character, maybe just AFK for 15 or 20 minutes and give it the time that it would normally have for you to do the starting sequence to go through and build up some of those settlements. Number two is if you're using a quick start save, like one that's right near the exit to the vault, the Conqueror menu will still come up, but then the same issues apply that I just mentioned with alternate start mods, where you might want to give Conqueror some time. Now, Conqueror doesn't actually finish everything in that light speed. That would be virtually impossible with everything that it's doing. What it instead does is it stages things out. So it does the visual stuff first, so that when you first arrive at settlements, they look to be done, but they're not really. There's a lot of background stuff that goes on. So then after it's done visually building them, it then configures all the plots. Then it adds all of the civilians and settlers. And then finally, it handles things like scrapping and cleanup. So if you arrive and rush right to settlements as soon as you get out of the vault, you're likely gonna run into some things that aren't so immersive, where you're watching things kind of happen from the Conqueror code. And that's because this is a very complex system that it's building. So one of the things that will likely show up in the initial patch, or the first post-launch patch of Conqueror, is a progress meter for the startup sequence, so that you know when it's done. So if you wanted to, you could just let your character sit until that is completely finished. So watch for that in one of the very first patches to make the system more immersive, because we'd rather see you just wait at the beginning where you haven't really invested into your character, and then have all of that stuff done so that everything is a seamless experience for you. Now, there's really no way we can bypass the amount of time that's going to take for a lot of that. It's just part of the depth of what's going on. Generally, when you're playing Sim Settlements in real time with the city plans, each city plan is placed over the span of a few minutes at each level, so each level would take several minutes. So we've already sped up the code pretty much as fast as we can possibly get it. That's one of the reasons we attached Workshop Framework as a requirement, because it adds a much faster threading engine to the game. So we've done what we can in speed, so now it's just a matter of you protecting your own immersion, and we're going to add some tools to help you do that. But know that the speed that it's at right now is about as fast as it can get, and I would say the total process of the actual placing of settlements is fairly quick. It can happen within about 15 to 20 minutes, but then for it to fully finish everything could take upwards of an hour or two, which in the grand scheme of the length of most playthroughs, which probably last hundreds of hours, it's kind of a drop in the bucket. So we don't consider it a huge deal, but just wanted you to be aware of that, so that when you come out, if you run into things that are in the middle of the process or building, or some of the early settlements don't have any settlers or civilians yet, that is normal. Just got to wait a little bit, and eventually we'll get a progress meter in there. All right, guys, that was a lot of information. That was a very long-winded tutorial. I wanted to get you guys all the details you needed. Hopefully those of you who just wanted to know how to get started got that information early and ditched out of the video, and the rest of you, I hope you are fully educated on using this system. So like I said, keep an eye out for additional Conqueror videos as more content is added to the mod that's opened up beyond the Raider playthrough. All right, guys, take care and enjoy the mods.